This episode of Historians of the Movies podcast is brought to you by you. Thank you to our Patreon.com subscribers, Rod Fleck, Peggy Lane, and PJ Shapiro. If you would like to support the Historians of the Movies podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/historians of the movies or by shooting us an email at hatmpodcast@gmail.com. Now time for the show. Ahoy there, mateys, and welcome to Historians of the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are talking about movies and the histories behind them. And today is special because it's Talk Like a Pirate Day, and that means we've got to talk about a pirate movie. And of course, we're talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, or maybe it's Pirates of the Caribbean. It's Pirates of someplace, and for you guys, I have two amazing pirate historians. I'm talking about Jamie Goodall and Rebecca Simon. Guys, these are two of the forefront of pirate historians in the world right now, and they came on to talk to us about Pirates of the Caribbean, the mythology around pirates, why we can't seem to shake our love for them, and why we love our movies about pirates, whether it's Pirates of the Caribbean or maybe even Black Sails. We're going to talk about that today, too. We're talking about the mythology. We're going to talk about what these movies get right, what they get wrong, and the truth behind the golden age of piracy. This is an absolutely fun podcast. I promise, God, not to make you walk the plank. It's something I don't even know. Guys, I'm tired. I've been on the mountain all day. So let's talk about pirates. Let's talk about ships. Let's talk about crime. Let's talk about the ocean. Let's talk about this movie. Sit back and relax, because Pirates of the Caribbean is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Okay, so I'm excited because I was just telling Jamie, I've been recording just a crap ton of pods, and I've been wanting to do this movie, for like the longest time. And I actually went to a few different scholars. I was like, who wants to do pirates? And they're like, I don't understand television. I'm like, and then I was like, wait, I'm friends with Jamie. Jamie will do it. Jamie will say, okay. And then Jamie came on, we did Goonies, and it was amazing. And I was like, all right, fine. And then she brought me to you, Rebecca, to like, I'm like, who else can you? She's like, I got you. So, thank you.
It was like this
here.
Day would come. I said this to Jamie before. I was like, the day would come when we finally start collaborating.
Okay, so I have to tell you, like, people always act this way too. When I bring them on the pod, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm like, this is me, right? Like, this is such a low bar. Like, it's just like, I am the lowest of low. You're like, I'm so happy. I'm like, are you though? Like, what's wrong with you? But also, hi, thank you for, being here tonight. So I'm very excited to have you both on to talk about this movie. Are you guys, like, where are you guys at? Rebecca, where are you riversiding in from?
So I'm coming in from Ventura, California, which is like a small town right in between Santa Barbara and Los Angeles. So
oh yeah,
just outside the really bad heat wave we've got going on right now. I work in the San Fernando Valley at Cal State Northridge, and it was 110 when I was out there today. So
get the heck out. That sounds awful.
Yeah, we're used to it here. 110 is pretty. Once you hit 100 degrees, hot is hot, or like 95, hot is hot.
Can I tell you, that was like the same thing when I was doing my graduate work at Minnesota. Once it gets cold enough, it doesn't matter. Like, I went outside one morning, it was -30. And I was like, I want to know what that feels like. And you know what? It didn't feel any different than like -5, because there's like a point of no return. Like, you were just cold. Like, you couldn't really notice that. I mean, it was obviously you could, but it's like, I remember there would be days when I would do walk into campus, or I'd ride the bus and then get to campus. It'd be like 20, and I'd be sweating inside of like my cold weather gear, because my cold weather gear was set up for like thermal nightmare. It's like, it's the exact opposite. So like, once you hit a point, whatever. Anyway, Jamie, where are you?
So I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC. So fall is slowly on its way. So I have this tree in my yard. Okay. I call it my emo tree because, and it's like it was meant to be because I am an emo kid still. It was never a phase, Mom. I know, really shocked. You, an emo kid?
All right, totally.
But it is a plum blossom tree. And so in the spring, very briefly, beautiful little like flowers, right? Within a week of the bloom, the flowers go black, like just this like cherry black color. And they're just black all summer. And it's amazing. But then you start to get to fall and everything falls off. And it just is the most dead looking tree of all time. And it is now in that process of dropping its black leaves. It is becoming dead. It's like me, right? Like,
is it a metaphor, Jamie, for the rise and fall of the golden age of piracy? We're just going to roll with that today. This is so complicated. I so want to like break down this idea of piracy because we have this idea. I'm like Captain Segway tonight, but like it's romanticized so freaking much. These are a bunch of villains that we're going to talk about, and yet we love them. I don't know. This is like of all the people that we write these stories about. It's like I don't know. So, do you get actual plums on these trees though to come back?
No, it's not an actual like plum producing thing, which is most unfortunate because I do love a good plum, but. You know, it is.
Wow, that was the most exciting words I've ever heard. Actually, you know what's bad? I was actually going to say, like, I love prunes, and I didn't discover that till later. Like, wow, these are good. Like the shit that I find myself into now that I'm in my like late 40s and 47. I'm like, wow, I sure hope I can find some dried apricots at Trader Joe's today. I'm like, is this where I'm at now? Like, I had such potential. I'm going to go talk about pirates tonight and pretend that I'm cool. Just not. So, whatever. It's fine. All right, let's do this. Let's talk about Pirates of the Caribbean tonight. Let's just jump into this freaking thing. I'm so excited. Everybody loves this movie. This movie is like super important because it kind of came out of nowhere. I remember when people were announcing that they were going to do it. This is going to fail gloriously. Johnny Depp is over. No one wants to watch this movie. Nope. And then it just completely revitalized the field. Feels like it's like turned people's heads. It's such a fun movie. People love this film. We've been waiting on this to record this because we got Talk Like a Pirate Day coming up. So I've been wanting to get this on deck for a while. And Jamie actually made me wait. She's the first guest who was like, "Oh, come on, but not yet." I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I'm so excited though that both of you guys are here. So, do we want to start by introducing you guys, Jamie and Rebecca, about like who you are and what you're doing here? Rebecca, you can go first. It's your first time to Historians of the Movies podcast. You want to introduce yourself and what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Rebecca Simon, and I'm a historian of the Golden Age of Piracy. And my PhD was about public executions of pirates and representations of pirates in the British Atlantic world in the 17th and 18th centuries. And currently I teach at two colleges. I'm at Santa Monica College as an adjunct instructor, and I'm a lecturer at Cal State Northridge. So that's what I'm doing. And I've published 3 books on pirates, and the most recent one was The Pirates Code, Laws and Life Aboard Ship, and it's in hardback, and it's coming out in paperback this fall, so which is very exciting. And that one's my favorite one, so I'm like always most excited to talk about that one.
I'm terrified. I'm in the middle of writing my first book right now. You know, actually, I'm not. I'm starting writing the first book, and you guys have published before, and I'm like, I don't know how this happens. Like, I know other people write books, multiple books, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to write the first one. Sorry to the University of Oklahoma Press with my contract.
It's a magical process.
Yeah.
It's like writing your diss all over again. It's like, wow, I thought I hated myself the first time. No, I just still do. Yeah, anyway, Jamie.
Yeah. So I also
depressing.
I know. Let's bring it up a little bit. So
let's
my
go.
Sweet pirate glass here. Clearly.
Oh, okay.
Clearly.
What are you drinking? Oh, before we go back, Rebecca, what are you drinking?
I'm just drinking a beer. I'm drinking an 805, which is very popular in the area I'm from. And this is one of my husband's beer glass from the time before he knew me. And it's called Draftsman Ale Works. So,
all right.
Nothing exciting.
Love it. Jamie, what you got?
So I'm drinking an old fashioned. And it's in a rocks glass that a friend of mine sent me. that has the little Jolly Roger on it. But it says, every normal man must be tempted at times to spit on his hands, hoist the black flag, and begin slitting throats. H.L. Mencken. So, I mean, you just gotta be ready to just do this. So I work as a government historian. So, usual disclaimers. I do not represent the U.S. Army and all that fun stuff. Because, I published an op-ed once, when Made by History was still in the Washington Post, and got lots of rape and death threats, and they forgot to put my disclaimer on there. And Center of Military History was like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So that was fun.
Oh, lovely.
But so my doctoral dissertation was looking at pirates as tastemakers and shapers of consumer culture. And so I've done 3 books and a Nat Geo bookazine, but my books have been regionally focused. I did work with the History Press, so just kind of worked my way from the Chesapeake to the Mid-Atlantic to New England. Currently working on a book on the history of taverns, inns, and public houses of Virginia for the History Press. So not directly pirate, but there will still, of course, be pirates in the book. Can't not have pirates. And then actually, Rebecca and I got some really great feedback on a book proposal we put in on using 50 objects to tell the history of piracy and privateering globally. So we're doing some responses to readers' reports, and then hopefully we'll get to dive right into that material culture analysis of piracy across the globe.
I do not know how you guys are doing this again. I work my day job, which is definitely not sponsoring this podcast. I should probably put this out there because people I work for actually listen to my pod, and I don't know why. So the Forest Service is not bringing you anything, and not in any form or function sanctioning this conversation we're about to have. Nor are the fine people at Pacifico Beer, who make a lovely beer and are encouraged to sponsor the Historians of the Movies podcast. It's my very first one. I bought this at Costco. They have like the big things, right? And the box is yellow. And I was going looking to tell you, my ex-wife's cousin and I remained super. I kept half of her family in the divorce. I kept like an entire wing, like her mom's sister Joyce and all their kin, like her husband Peter and Katie, their daughter, and Jeff, the son. Like Jeff and I are bros. Like I kept all of them. Anyway, we have this traditional thing where like by September we go out looking for like the Sam Adams Oktoberfest beers.
Yep.
Like when they start hitting the stores. That's how that's Jeff and I actually celebrate fall. Like the first time someone, it's like, oh, nature is healing. It's returning. So I went looking for this at Costco because again, I buy clothes at Costco because I'm old. Did not see it, but I did find the fine Pacifico beer that could bring you the Historians of the Movies podcast right here. So we want sponsors so bad. I am so excited. Let's talk about this thing. This movie tonight. I want to talk about pirates. I want to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean. Do you say Caribbean? Caribbean? How do you guys say it?
I say Caribbean.
I say Caribbean.
The context. It depends on the context.
Right? It's like the or the, right? There's those like moments, right? Okay. Right off the bat, right out of the gate. Who's your favorite pirate and why? Jamie?
All right. So I'm gonna go with Stede Bonnet. I love him because he has this reputation of being the most ridiculous, terrible pirate of all time, because he was not born into poverty. He was not in any sort of situation that like normally would influence a young gentleman to enter into a life of maritime predation. He was a part of the landed gentry of Barbados. He had a lot of money. He as far as we know, his family enslaved other human beings. And apparently, according to various records, he just got fed up with this bougie, privileged life, thought his wife was a nag, and decided, hey, I'm out. Left all of his property and shit to his family, but like used his money. First mistake, he went and bought a pirate ship. He did not commandeer a pirate
steal it?
ship.
No, like, well,
he
just the idea of being a pirate.
So he
offered
buys
a
this
receipt.
ship. And then the second mistake was he hired a crew. So he paid them a wage to come crew his pirate ship. So, once you start paying people, you have to keep paying them, especially when they could readily slit your throat at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
But by all accounts, he actually was not that bad of a pirate. He had a few successes. Blackbeard took him under his wing at one point. He was like sailing with some of like the most notorious pirates of the age. And, things didn't work out in the end for him, but I just love the idea. I mean, spoiler alert, he dies.
Dies, Jamie. You got to give us something more than that. Like a spoiler would be like he's still alive.
Well, we don't have a lot of records of him after, his untimely pirate death. And there's not a lot of like intrigue around what actually happened. It just, it's the short life of a pirate. But
sure.
I just love the idea of this guy like waking up one day, midlife crisis, doesn't go out and buy a sports car, like just gets up and says, I'm going to buy a ship. I'm going to go plunder the seas. This is my life now. Love it.
For me, probably Captain Kidd. He's kind of the reason that my whole PhD happened, because I was reading about his execution and was like, why was he taken to the
also
Thames?
Died.
Yeah. He was executed on the Thames at Execution Dock in 1701. And I was like, oh, why was he taken there? I knew other criminals would go to Tyburn Tree because I like dark stuff. And I was like, I want to read a book or an article about it. And no one had written about it. So I decided to. So I always give him props for that. But I like the ambiguity about Captain Kidd. There's like sometimes people will debate as to whether or not he was an actual pirate because his whole thing was like he caught a ship he wasn't supposed to. He plundered ships he wasn't supposed to. But he claimed that, this ship actually was a French ship or had relationship with the French. I had these French passes. I was allowed to rob this ship for the British government. But then at the trial, they couldn't produce the passes or they wouldn't. It was like a whole thing. So the way he just always towed the line, he was always pissing off the British government. They were only reason why they really kept him on was because he was such a great privateer. He brought so much money back to the British government and he was really good at telling his story and he was really good at his own PR. He married wealthy. So he's just an interesting character. And I always really love kind of ambiguity, are they a pirate? Are they not? With movies and films, books, are they bad? Are they not? So yeah, I really enjoy that. And I just like, I like also just how he really inspired so much mythology about pirates. Like the whole buried treasure mythology is because of Captain Kidd, because he claimed he hid all of his goods, which of course were never found. And, but that's why we think pirates buried treasure. So he really kind of like set off so much of what we think we know about pirates. And he was a direct inspiration for some of the pirates during the height of the Golden Age, in the third round around 1710 to 1720, 25. So yeah, really fun, ambiguous character.
Was Kidd Scottish?
Yeah, he was. He was still, that's also what's interesting about him is he was Scottish, but he worked for the British government as a privateer, like a legally sanctioned pirate, basically, a contract to go after specific enemy ships. So that's also kind of like an interesting thing because getting a Scottish person to work for the British government, that's a big ask.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't really like each other very much for the most part. So that's also quite interesting. And I don't know why exactly he did choose to work for the British government. It was probably just a very lucrative career for someone who wanted to be powerful in the maritime world. But I'm sure there's probably more to it. But I just don't know because there's not very much known about his life before he was a privateer.
Right, he just kind of emerges in history,
like a lot of them do.
Yeah. Look, it may be cliche. I got to go Blackbeard. I've got, Jamie knows this. I'm trying to show it, but it's just not there. Like I've got the Blackbeard flag tattoo on my left forearm. And I have to tell you, like Jamie's talking about midlife crises. I kind of had one when I got this thing. I had always wanted a tattoo, but I could never figure out a thing that I wanted on me forever. Right. And I was in graduate school in Minnesota. I'm 39 years old. My best friend is getting married soon. And I'm not figuring out what I'm doing with my life. And I'm like, wait a second, Edward Teach, like, he died at 38. And he wasn't a pirate for that long, right? Only a few years. And yet, maybe the most well-known pirate in history, right? So he made his mark in a short amount of time, and I outlived the son of a bitch. So I felt like this is a thing. And then I ended up starting like collecting all this Blackbeard bullshit. Like my cat. Like I was like looking online, and then there was this cat online at the Rescue League in Florida, and his name was Edward Thatch, which is one of the lesser known of his aliases, right? I mean, more well known as Edward Teach, but this one was Thatch, and I was like, oh, okay, this is my dude, right? So it's like now all of a sudden I've got the tattoo, I've got that. Jamie knows I've got. Actually, this was inspired. I think I told you, Jamie. I remember you have this tattoo on you elsewhere. The East India Trade. This is like getting the Amazon.com
That's really
logo.
Cool.
From like
now
back,
I feel like I need to.
Do we need this for like the picture there, like that? Is that what we need right there? So
yes.
That'll be a great thing. But like, oh wow, you guys are douchey. All right, cool.
Well, I got these because there's no. I mean, I don't study the East Indies for the most part, right? Like my work has been on the Atlantic, but I'm sorry, there's no the English in the Atlantic. It was the Royal African Company, which has its own connotations. I'm not like that's a whole thing. And then the Dutch West India Company doesn't have a cool symbol, so I just went with the English East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, and so boom.
You know, people see this one and they recognize it from the Pirates of the Caribbean films, right? And they're pirates. I'm like, actually, not really. They just had a monopoly. Which do they take from people? Yes. So
how do we define piracy, though?
Then
right?
I turn into the whole story thing. Like,
that's always a good question.
What to a layperson? No. Okay. All right. Let's just look at this. Let's talk about this movie. All right, let's talk about Pirates of the Caribbean. I want to lay out some basic ideas first and foremost. Rebecca, Jamie, we'll start with you, Rebecca. When we think about this movie,
I love this movie. I love it so much. I saw it when being from Southern California, just outside LA, I would go to Disneyland once a year, like my entire life. My favorite ride was always Pirates of the Caribbean. It's funny because I wasn't like actually really into pirates, but I loved the ride. And I was 18 when the movie came out and I was so into it. I just graduated high school. My friends and I saw it. We saw it like 4 times in theaters that summer because we just loved it. You know, we were huge Johnny Depp fans before things. And, you know, so we just really loved it. But the thing I really love it is not only is it just a really fun story, but one thing I always give props to Disney for is they do a lot of work in terms of making sure mythology is good and right. And they really incorporate a lot of that while putting their own spin on it. They show the real presence of the Royal Navy and what the Royal Navy was trying to do in response to piracy. Now, it is debatable as to whether or not the Royal Navy actually really cared about piracy that much, but they did a good job with it in the movie. And I thought they showed like pirate culture very well. They showed a very realistic, diverse crew, including a woman as part of the crew, which probably happened more often than we think. They incorporated certain, maritime mythology. I mean, debatable ones such as women being bad luck on ship. That actually wasn't really as much of a thing. But I just think that they tell a very good pirate story. And I think they also really show kind of like such interesting dynamics between those who are in charge and like what they're trying to do about the piracy problem and how much of a problem pirates actually are. You know, they don't even take Jack Sparrow seriously. They're like, you're a terrible pirate. But then he ends up, of course, being like the anti-hero of the movie in a way, and for the entire franchise as well. I love the movie. It's the one I always recommend. I show clips from it when I do lectures for like the Atlantic world and everything like that. I think there's a lot we can do with that movie. And it's just fun.
It is.
Never gets old.
People always expect me to hate the Pirates of the Caribbean movies because they're like, oh, it can't be historically accurate, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, to a degree, no, it absolutely is not historically accurate. That's not the purpose of the movie, right? What does get portrayed accurately, which Rebecca mentioned, is the mythology, right? This, there is the idea of like cursed treasure. There are thoughts of like what happens to pirates in the afterlife and what does an afterlife look like? We've got all these really great interviews. I say interviews very loosely with religious figures who would go and interview these pirates on their way to their death march to the gallows, or trying to get them to repent prior. And there is a lot of like concern for their souls in the afterlife. So this idea of like being cursed and being damned for stealing treasure is really, that is part of that mythology. Were there zombie pirates? I mean, I wasn't there, but I'm gonna venture probably not. But you know what? Like, it's really, really interesting. And I will say, I actually really love across the series the diversity that they show and the ways that they track the mythology. So, I love the first. It's a very pure movie. I love the original. However, I would say my favorite of the entire series is At World's End. World's End, yes.
Why?
I love it. 2 reasons. 1, the goddess Calypso.
Yeah, good one.
My heart. I just, I love the goddess Calypso. 2, Chang-Chi, Chang Yisao. The way they represent her, the fact that they bring her into the fold, I was very, very pleased with that fact, because she's if I didn't love Stede Bonnet so much, she would be my favorite pirate probably of all time. She just has such a commanding presence. Her history up to becoming this, like, I don't even want to say pirate queen. She was like, just like the commander of pirates in like the South China Seas and stuff. And so At World's End, that is, I think, my favorite of the entire series.
I feel like the first film in my mind is the most complete single story.
Yeah, agreed.
Of the group, right? And you've got so many. One of the wonderful things that this entire franchise does is it gives you such delicious characters. And look, like Depp's Jack Sparrow gets all the attention, right? But like, in the first film, I can't actually take it's Jeffrey Rush's Barbossa.
Oh yeah,
that I love so much. That in that perfect line of like, you best start believing in ghost stories. You're in one. And just his voice and the way he carries this gravelly kind of thing. And he looks the part, and Barbossa sounds like, I'm getting the shivers on my arms right now. Like he looks the part and he feels right?
Well, the code is more like guidelines, right?
Oh yeah, you're right. Like he's got this wonderful thing, and he's so perfect in the idea. And so the mythology, one of the things it does so well, there's a Star Wars aspect to this, and I'm going to explain it to you. Or I'm going to mansplain it to you. Actually, I'm going to mansplain Pirates to you guys, because that's what that'll
love a good mansplaining.
That'll increase the listenership. I'm like, oh, Jason was such a great guy. Would Pirates mansplain? But I love the idea that there's this whole other backstory that they allude to, but we don't really know entirely, right? Like the idea that Barbossa was Sparrow's number 2, and they overthrew him, but we never see it, right? We don't go off and get the Han Solo film and ruin all the stuff, right? We just know these things happen, and we have to kind of play with our imaginations to kind of know what happens, right? And later, and then you guys are talking like Bill Nye's Davy Jones. He's so perfect.
Yeah, he was so good at that.
But do you know who I really love? Do you know whose character arc I really love? He's not even a pirate. Norrington.
Oh my God, his is so good.
Norrington gets such
my desk.
Because he gets such an interesting arc, right? He starts as this very staunch, I am a man of the book. I am a man of the law. This is what we do. And yet, by the end of it, by his unfortunate demise, we start to see how he shifts, and he realizes that pirates are people. There is a human complexity to them. And he starts to realize that there is a humanity to them, right? And it takes a little bit of his own inner workings and being confronted then by, his superiors in later films, where he realizes, maybe I can't operate to the letter of the law. That the law, there are shades of 50 shades of gray. No, there are shades of gray to the law, and I love that art.
I don't know. I think that you are seriously discounting the hotness of Keira Knightley. The realizing that Norrington has to go up against prime Orlando Bloom.
I will say,
and has to make a real choice.
They did not do a very good job of like making Norrington appear that much older later, right? So when we see him originally, when he originally is like fawning over Elizabeth, and she's a fucking child, and he is a grown ass adult.
She's what, 17, 18?
Yeah.
Well, when he first likes her, she's like 10.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
They're on the boat.
Child. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
She's like 10 when he is first like kind of fawning over her. And yes, she's like 17, 18 when we see them later. But the thing is, Norrington doesn't age that much because it's the same actor from that moment to later, where we go from having a child actor to Keira Knightley. So the age kind of gets lost. Yeah. I feel like as we move forward, we kind of forget that Norrington's that much older than her. Yes, we lose
that's a really good point. And he even says, like, I've watched you grow, like, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like, when I think about it, like, you're absolutely right. It's creepy. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It's also really funny to point out that he, like, doesn't age. And maybe it's kind of their way of trying to, like, push that away.
Minimize
like, make us forget that.
Yeah, because we want to like him towards the end of the series.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like, so when he dies, we're like, oh, kind of like this dude now, right?
Yeah, he's one of those like morally ambiguous characters who has like that type of growth. Like those are the ones we're always kind of drawn to.
Yeah, and we get a few of these, right? Like, I don't know, it's almost like Sparrow's the least interesting character in the entire series.
Yeah, as the story goes, he doesn't develop really, at least in my opinion. It's been a while since I've seen some of the other films, but I don't think he really develops as a character. He's the same.
No, he doesn't have a character arc, right?
Yeah,
he is maybe the piece around which everyone bends themselves.
Yeah,
in this series,
has a mild arc, I would say, because he goes from like at the beginning, like when he gets like stranded with Elizabeth, and he's like trying to come on to her, and he's like, "Why is the rum gone?" To like later on, he's willing to allow her, like he lets her sacrifice him.
Yeah,
to save William. And that's so he is a minor, but it's so minor compared to the other characters. I mean, even Barbossa's character gets a pretty significant like shift with the whole Calypso thing into later. Even Elizabeth Swann's dad gets like this really weird arc. And so I think you're right though, that like he just doesn't change enough to have Sparrow is Sparrow pretty much throughout.
Yeah.
Let me ask you like a meta commentary, because you both teach, and you've lectured, you've got these books. Why, before we keep going on this, why do pirates remain such an important part of our imagination? Some, I'd say 300 years past the golden age of piracy, which we should probably explain as well at some point in time. But like, let's talk about just why. Do you get a sense of why pirates have continued? We see films. I play literally almost every single night a game called Skull and Bones with my friend Colin Colburn, where I get to pretend I'm a pirate only in the East Indies. But why pirates? Like, why are we affixed on these criminals?
Well, it's funny. That was actually the subject of my first book, which is called Why We Love Pirates. So I began looking at that when I was doing my master's. I looked at perceptions of pirates and like how we went from, Marcus Rediker's Villains of All Nations, they're terrorists, to Jack Sparrow. There's so many theories. You can't really pin down one reason, but I think like one of the things why some people were quite fascinated by pirates, at least going back, 300 years ago, is pirates could have been seen as agents of social mobility in a way. It used to be that you were locked in to your social status. If you were middle class or poor, you were going to stay there. And so would your ancestors, so would your children and grandchildren. But a lot of pirates started out poor, not all, but a lot did. And then some could get quite wealthy and could retire if they were lucky. And I think they also kind of really sort of display this like, anti-establishment attitude. it's interesting how like pirates popularity just kind of really, no pun intended, ebbs and flows like over time. It seemed like, pirates during the pandemic got popular again. Black Sails, which ended in 2017, that show
we're talking about Black Sails
big
tonight.
resurgence. Oh, that's one of my favorite shows ever. It's the one I always recommend when people are like, what pirate thing should I watch? I'm like, Black Sails.
Yes.
But, that had a huge resurgence. Then Our Flag Means Death came out, and I have my own opinions about that show. Yeah, I see Jamie nodding. Yeah. But I think they just kind of offer this anti-establishment stuff, like especially during times where we're feeling a lot of that. And plus also, like, we like seeing fun bad guys win. We just do. We have this kind of fascination with it. We cheer when Long John Silver gets away at the end of Treasure Island. Jack Sparrow himself is supposed to be a villainous pirate in the film, but we love him the most, at least in the first film, like we were just saying. So can't really pin down one reason, but I think that like some of that could be one of the many.
Yeah. Also, Rebecca, can we say that Black Sails has one of the most single satisfying endings of any series ever made?
It's so good because one of the things I really loved about it is it's like the only time you see an appearance of Mary Read, the other female pirate. That never happens. It's always Anne Bonny, and I have a lot of theories about that too, which I want to explore further.
We're going to come back to Black Sails in a bit. This may turn into a Black Sails because it's... All right,
It's
Jamie,
so good.
before we go, it builds every season gets better than the season before it.
It's unbelievable character development.
Oh my God. All right. And it's so well done. This is now the Black Sails podcast. It's so good. And it's so well lit up. The direct comparison is Game of Thrones, but Black Sails is so much more immensely rewatchable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, anybody want to do a Black Sails rewatch podcast? Rewatch
I
podcasts
just
are
want to
very
say,
I'm
Jamie,
down.
do a
Straight
Black
up, let's
Sails
go.
podcast.
You want to do it? I'm down.
Yeah.
With the three of us, and we'll have a rotating guest.
I will
down.
do this
All right.
for every single episode without hesitation. Let's go.
I'm serious. Let's go. All right. Okay, good.
Right.
Come back to that. Everyone you just signed on with 4 episodes. It's 4 seasons. 10 episodes a season?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think one season has like 8 episodes, something like that. I feel like one season is shorter than the other.
Guys, the theme song is on my gym playlist.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Jamie, why do we love pirates? Also Black Sails.
So I think I agree with a lot of what Rebecca said. And I think a lot of it has to do too with the idea that pirates could be anybody.
Yeah.
Pirates could be your neighbor. Pirates could have been your brother, your sister, whoever, right? And the idea that you have these individuals who were willing to risk their lives to, subvert the traditional economic system at a time when it was so hard to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think there's a fine line between piracy and smuggling, because I feel like a lot of times there was a lot of overlap. Not that they were one and the same, but that there was a lot of overlap. And I think also the fact that piracy is across time and space. We have, from the earliest human records we have inscriptions about commerce raiding, about maritime predation, and it's all the way to today. And it's never stopped, right? We have this idea, especially because we, here in America and in the Western world, we have the conception of the golden age of piracy, that it ended, that piracy ended. But the thing is, it never did. And it's still ongoing today. And I think for a lot of people that is really intriguing. Like, how can this activity, even today, with the most, advanced technology, with the most powerful militaries and naval forces in the world, you still have pirates out there who are making shit happen.
Look at me. I'm the captain now.
No, exactly. I always recommend that film as well, because I'm like, people are like, what was piracy like? I'm like, watch Captain Phillips. It's the same thing, except they have modernized weapons. It's terrifying. Like,
yeah.
Terrifying. They weren't, and Jamie, that was such a good point about how, like, they could be anyone. They could be your neighbor, and it could be so shocking. And people would flock to these executions, follow the, a train of people going down to the docks or wherever they were, whether the Atlantic world or in England. And people, just hundreds of people, sometimes thousands, would crowd around these pirates and listen to them. There was a case where in Jamaica, there were some pirates who were going to be hanged. And then like the whole crowd just rushed forward and basically rescued them off the gallows. Like, it's just absolutely fast. This whole fascination of pirates, like, is itself just so fascinating. I love it. It's funny. Like, I know that, like, I remember when I was doing, I was about to do like my oral exams for my PhD, and apparently there were like some other professors doing someone else's oral exams who were like, oh, pirates are passé, like whatever. But luckily my supervisor defended me. But it really is one of those subjects that's never ending, because piracy has always been here, just like Jamie said. It's so fantastic.
No, absolutely. Are there common misconceptions to this day that you both run into about, so maybe before we jump back into this film, what are the common misconceptions of piracy in this era, we'll say?
I think the big one that I always come across, of course, is like buried treasure. You know, that's what they would do. There were these swashbucklers. I think there's also actually kind of a misconception about how violent pirates were. A lot of pirates actually weren't nearly as violent as we think. They would just wanted to get in, get out, get their goods as fast as they could, you know, with minimal damage, because they're going to lose people too if they engage in that. Blackbeard never killed anyone until his very last battle.
Right.
Those who did get really violent, they were the exception to the rule, and that's why we know about them, like Charles Vane, Ned Lowe, George Lowther, etc. That's another, I think, big misconception. There's so many more, but I'm like, Jamie, talk about even more. Talk about more.
Well, and I think the violence thing too is that it was one thing to have a reputation for violence, right? You wanted to have a reputation that preceded you. But the thing is, if people thought that there was absolutely no way you were going to give them quarter, they have nothing to lose. So of course they're going to fight back. But if people feared your violence, however, heard that you had some leniency or some clemency, they were much more likely to just lay down arms immediately. And that's what you want, right? So you had to have a reputation for violence yet, right? Like, it was one of those weird things. Another common misconception that I hear all the time is that eye patches were used to enable them to go up and down.
Thank you.
And they were like, oh, well, it enabled one eye to be always ready for the dark. And
oh, yes, thank you.
That's
I hate that one so much.
Because you're not going up and down deck enough to warrant that. Right?
Yeah, you're staying on the deck. You don't really go below deck until the quartermaster's like, okay, let's see what's there that we can take.
Yeah. So there was no need for that. It wouldn't have worked the way that we envision it working. Haha, pun. So no, they that's not why they're wearing eye patches. Anybody wearing an eye patch, it's probably because they lost their eye.
Exactly.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
The other, of course, being that all pirates talked the same.
Yeah.
That is very much a holdover from Robert Newton's portrayal during his 1950s Long John Silver gig. And then he carried that onto Blackbeard when he did that later in the 50s. But he basically took his West Country accent and exaggerated it. And that became kind of like, this is how pirates talk. And I mean, honestly, we have pirates from everywhere, so they're going to talk like everybody.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to sound any more unusual. Like, you know, there is maritime slang that they would use. You know, like every industry, we have our own slang and acronyms. The same with them. But otherwise, yeah, it'll be like just get into any room, any business place or whatever. You'll hear some variety of accents just like that on a ship.
Yeah, Kid sounded Scottish because he was Scottish.
He's from Scotland. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You've got this incredible diversity of people who could be pirates, things like that. I want to jump into this idea, like, where do pirates come from? Like, you were talking about this idea, like I often refer to conquistadors in the book that I'm writing as the second sons of Spain, right? Because if you're the first son, you're inheriting everything through primogeniture and so forth. It's the second sons and the third sons who've got to go out and make their mark, make their money, and things like that. So we know that piracy itself was a difficult life. I'm sure you guys could explain on this more. Who goes into this line of work? Who is attracted? It's not generally the upper classes, correct?
Well, so that's where things get complicated.
Ooh, complicate our history, Jamie. Go on.
Yeah, it's all complicated.
So the predecessors to the so-called golden age of piracy, right, are the Elizabethan Sea Dogs, who were technically privateers.
A minor league baseball team.
Yes. Technically privateers. However, it is one of those fine, weird, wavy gray lines, whatever. But they were all the upper echelons of society. Yeah. Drake, Hawkins, all of those individuals were coming from upper echelons of society. They were able to use either family money or investors to help them. They were, operating primarily as either enslavers and doing like slave trade runs, etc. But they are the upper crust. Mm-hmm. They're not impoverished people. And so, yes, when you get to the golden age, we're more of them on the like lowering, middling dregs of society. Yes. The problem is we don't know most of their names.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can't trace where most of these individuals are coming from as far as their familial status, their social status, any of that stuff. Because we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And then of course you also have outliers like Stede Bonnet, who is coming from money, and he's pulling from that history though of the Sea Dogs, where he's like, this is what rich people used to do. They used to be pirates. They just got away with it. So why can't I? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's much more complicated. We have this idea of the solo bachelor, poor swashbuckler, just looking for adventure, when the vast majority of pirates were typically family men who were doing it because they were trying to provide for their families.
Yep.
This completely defeats the idea of like these guys out there, right? Like I remember reading Mark Hanna, and he was like, yeah, these guys want to be farmers. I mean, it's like you get in and get out, make your money, and then go do something. This is not like the call. Exactly. This is not a Jimmy Buffett song, right?
No. Yeah, there were a couple of brothers from Bermuda who went swashbucking with Captain Cook in the South Seas, and then they took that money that they earned on like 2 voyages. They just did 2 voyages with him. They used that money. They came back to Bermuda. They invested it in buying property, and then they rented that property out to continue making money. That was their plan. They had no plans of being pirates for the rest of their lives. They did these 2 ventures, got their money, and came back and invested. And that's what a lot of pirates did, is that they went and they took they did 1, maybe 2 ventures.
Yeah.
If they were lucky.
Yeah. Right? The average lifespan of a pirate was about 2 years, whether they got captured or whether they decided they were able to retire.
Right.
Yeah. Or that's also something we have to think about as well in terms of like what class they were. Like Jamie's totally right. Like by the time we get to the so-called golden age of piracy, more pirate captains were probably more from like middling classes. But we also have to remember those, like the really infamous ones that, such as, Blackbeard, Vane, Hornigold, etc. Many of the major captains were veterans of the War of Spanish Succession as privateers. And so if you're going to be in a high ranking position on a ship, if you're a privateer, you're probably going to be educated in some way whatsoever. Captains generally knew how to read, so did quartermasters, et cetera, et cetera. And, most of these pirate captains who came to be, such as Blackbeard, who was Hornigold's second in command, Charles Vane, who was with Henry Jennings quite a bit, and Jack Rackham, who was with Charles Vane. Like, they all were kind of, at the very least, they were literate, which meant they had the money to be literate. And Blackbeard may have even come from like a merchant family. So, which meant he could have been actually quite wealthy. We just don't know. But in terms of like the rest of the crew, just like most other ships, the rest of the crew were probably very working class.
We keep referring to this golden age of piracy. Can you guys kind of elucidate like a rough year or a timeline? I think most people in their minds get a general sense via maybe popular media about when this stuff's taking place. But and the golden age of piracy tends to refer to a place, right? A space. We're thinking about the Caribbean generally when we talk about this in these terms, right? When and where is golden age piracy?
The golden age of piracy, really, it's kind of been defined as like 3 distinct time periods. So starting kind of like in the mid 1600s, going up into the late 1600s, this is where we have like lots of buccaneers within the Caribbean. A lot of them were French pirates going after Spanish ships. because all the Europeans are trying to become the main powers within the Caribbean for plantation islands and cash crops and everything like that. And so this is where we have a lot of these pirates are kind of fighting against different European powers for the most part within the Caribbean. And then what's interesting is that there is a second round that's kind of defined as the 1690s going into like the East Indies, the Red Sea. And this is because that's where we have British pirates like Henry Avery and Kidd. And then the third round is said to be like the end of the War of Spanish Succession. So about 1713 up until the death of William Fly in 1726, because that was the last big public execution presided over by Cotton Mather. And so that's where you have, that's kind of the round.
The Cotton Mather?
Yeah. The Cotton Mather. Oh yeah. He made it his life's mission to try to reform pirates. But supposedly like William Fly was like his last chance. And that's basically what made him quit, because William Fly was like, nope, I'm a pirate and I'm never, ever, ever going to repent. But it's the third round is the round pretty much everyone's always thinking of. This is where we have the famous pirates. And this is also where pirates are active in the most amount of places. The Caribbean, off the coast of North America, off the coast of West Africa, going down to South America, Central America. This is when they're like all over the place. And yeah.
All right. Well, what are the central conflicts of this film? Not to actually make this podcast about the film at all, but is this duality where constantly the British Empire is chasing Jack Sparrow? We have, they're kind of like the third piece here between Sparrow and Barbossa, and then the British Empire. So I'm kind of wondering if maybe we kind of talk about the role of these pirates, because we think about some of the privateers as being enlisted by Empire to conquer other pirates. So can you guys talk a little bit about the different ways in which piracy played in the construction of empire, say in North America, the Caribbean, so forth, during this era?
Yeah, I would say that for the most part, until we get to that post War of Spanish Succession, for the most part, the English, the French, the Dutch, they're not really paying attention to pirates, because even if they're not legally sanctioning them as privateers during specific conflicts, the fact is these pirates, as long as they don't attack their own countrymen, they're benefiting the empire. And so it's very easy for the crown to say, oh, we don't condone this. We had nothing to do with this. Slap on the wrist. It is what it is. And so for a good chunk of this golden age, a lot of these pirates are operating with impunity because it's just not in the best interest of the crown to do anything, because all of them are directing their efforts against the Spanish. And so they're kind of like, whatever. But by the time we get to the end of the pirate round, the end of the 1690s, and we get to that post-War of Spanish Succession, they start to turn on each other. It becomes where they are those villains of all nations, where the Englishmen will attack English ships. They don't give a shit. They're like, at this point, money is money, because we've seen how the empire treats us at the end of conflict. And so that's when empires are like, oh shit, maybe we should actually do something about this. Like, maybe now this is becoming a problem. So for example, like, you've got kind of the heavy hitters who are making what Kevin McDonald called the Indo-Atlantic, where they are leaving the Atlantic and making their way to the Indian Ocean, because the Mughal emperor is the Spanish learned very early on to secure their treasure ships with convoys. You do not attack a Spanish treasure ship unless it has been wrecked by a hurricane, because the Spanish never learned how to deal with hurricanes, no matter how many times they witnessed them. But in the Indian Ocean, the Mughal emperor is just constantly sending treasure, because people are making pilgrimages and he's sending money that way. And it's just constantly happening. And so you get this outpost in Madagascar, and like New York merchants are really heavily investing in this, because they're like, oh shit, this is a lot of money that is happening, because most pirates in the Atlantic are stealing commodities. They're stealing goods. They're trafficking in human beings. Whereas in the Indian Ocean, they're able to actually get their hands on gold, jewels, trinkets, etc. And so this is when the European, because the Mughal emperor, unlike the Spanish, where it's like, I'm so mad at you, England. The Mughal emperor is like, fuck no, I will burn your country down. That's when England is like, maybe we should do something. And so that's when you start to really see a concerted effort.
Yeah.
And international, like a cooperative effort to stamp out piracy. And that's sort of where we see by the 1720s, 1730s in the Atlantic, especially, it's really been like stamped down.
I've even heard, I forget where I read this. I read this not too long ago. But I read that like there's some arguments that the third round of the Golden Age of piracy is like one of the only times in history where we've really had any true, I'm putting this in quotes, air quotes, true pirates, because this is the time where, like you were saying, Jamie, English pirates are attacking the English. They don't care. They don't care who they're attacking. Whereas before, a lot of buccaneers, you know, they were working for governments. We have loads of more pirates were privateers, really. And you go back even to like the ancient world, you know, Greek pirates were funded by the government. You know, Grace O'Malley was working, you know, the Irish pirate, you know, she was working with Irish chieftains, and then eventually she began working for Queen Elizabeth. And, you know, but when we get to like the 1710s and 1720s, these are pirates that aren't working for any governments. They're trying to take down, or whether or not they're trying to take down governments is actually quite debatable, but they just don't care who they're attacking. They just want to get the money, and it doesn't matter where they're from. They don't really have their allegiances. But then once again, after this time period ends, that's when we start seeing more privateers again. A lot of pirates in terms of large organized fleets. We don't really see very many left in the Atlantic world. I'm talking about the Atlantic region, except for like one-offs here and there. So yeah, just something I read recently. I can't remember where I read it though. It's driving me nuts. If you know where that was, let me know.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I want to know where that came from, because that's one of the big things that like I've been thinking about is how we really don't have like pirates. If we want to get like super specific and super technical with the legal definition, which a lot of people try to get, honestly, you can't with a lot of maritime predation prior to the 1710s, because so many of them, whether they were funded or supported by the crown, they were still supported by local colonial officials.
Right.
And whether those people have the authority to do so or not, that gets debated. It becomes a whole, you know, legal entanglement. But yeah, I think you're right, though, that 1710s is such a unique, like, preponderance of activity.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there hasn't really been anything like it.
I want to ask you about Elizabeth Swann. Like this whole, we talked about Sparrow being, but it's Swann who's driving all of this. In a lot of different ways, right? Either we've got the love story revolving around her. She's got, you know, she is heir, you know, apparent. There's this whole aspect, the funny bit whenever they first see the dress on board. Can we talk a little bit about gender roles in this era and stuff? Later on, obviously, she becomes queen, pirate king, pirate queen. I forget which one she becomes in the series. In this era, say in the Caribbean, are there women pirates? I think, you know, I want you guys to jump in here. Like, are women accepted on board? Are there taboos about women?
I'll let Rebecca take this one.
So, in terms of female pirates, I've also written a lot about this as well. It was they're the two most famous female pirates of the Golden Age piracy were Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and they sailed together under the captainship of Jack Rackham, Calico Jack Rackham. And Anne Bonny was married to Jack Rackham. Mary Read was married to another member of the crew. We're not sure who, kind of an unnamed member. So the idea is, you know, the idea of the whole like women being bad luck on ships, it wasn't necessarily true. It was really more that women were seen to cause problems on ships quite a bit. Like Blackbeard, for instance, banned women. There was an idea that maybe mentally, emotionally, physically, they wouldn't be able to handle it. But we actually see more women on ships than we think in general. A lot of captains and quartermasters might bring their wives. There were women who were brought on ships because they had practical skills, such as, you know, caring for food, treating injuries, and that sort of thing. Lots of merchant ships took passengers, including women. Now, in terms of pirate ships, we don't know. Like, there are not very many, there are so few records really about pirates, especially from pirates themselves. I think that it's very possible there were probably more women than we think of. There's this idea that there were loads of women maybe who disguised themselves as men. And we have seen that in history, like women, Hannah Snell disguised herself as a man to join the Royal Navy in the mid 1700s. There was a woman who disguised herself to fight in the American Revolution, who was discovered and was so good she got like an honorable discharge. But there were probably more women than we really think of, because the reality is, like, working class women could handle it because many of them worked in domestic servitude, lugging pails of water and coal and everything. And they actually did have the body for it. They were slim, they were limber, they were light, they had muscle tone and everything like that. But in terms of like gender roles, women were expected to be at home. Their role was, you're going to get married. If you're more working class, you're either going to get married or you're going to work in domestic servitude. If you're upper class, you're going to get married. That's pretty much it. If you are really down on your luck, prostitution, or worst case scenario, homelessness. Women didn't have very many options. They were very heavily discouraged from pretty much anything, especially the maritime world. So there was probably this kind of idea, this fascination about the idea of women turning into pirates. Like Anne Bonny and Mary Read, in the Book of General History of the Pirates, which was a collection of biographies published in 1724, their names are highlighted, on the title page. Make sure to include that, because the idea of women being pirates was so ludicrous that they thought it would make a really great selling point. And people were really like in awe of it, because, who were women who were going to leave the traditional family home and go into this world of violence and depredation? But what's interesting is Anne Bonny and Mary Read, according to trial transcripts, we have very few records on them, according to survivors of their attacks, said that they fought more violently than the men did. They wore male clothing while fighting, only while fighting. They were not cross-dressers like a lot of people think. They were wielding swords more than anyone. But what we have to remember is that people were talking about women here. It was probably just more shocking to see two women fighting with the men. So I imagine no matter what, they're going to seem even more frightening than you'd expect. So, but they just kind of really subverted all of expectations. Not that they were seeking to do it. If a woman wanted to join a ship, it probably would have been for freedom's sake. Maybe she would have been forced into it, like many people were. But women's roles were very, very confined, really, until the 20th century. Let's be real. So, yeah, I can go on and on and on, but otherwise it's going to turn into a female pirates podcast. So,
don't worry, we're going to hit all of this on Black Sails. Jamie.
I mean, yeah, and I think the same is true even as we move forward. Like, even though Ching Shi or Cheng Yisao is one of the most feared pirate lords, pirate like commanders of the Eastern world, the fact is she only had that opportunity because she, according to what records we have, she began her life as a sex worker. She was forced into sex work in maritime spaces, and she ended up becoming the favored mistress of a pirate lord who then married her to take her out of that world. And then upon his death, he was just like, here, like that was her role. But for a lot of people, that was shocking to them. At first, they did not want to follow her. She did use her relationship with her stepson to help bolster her position. But she developed a lot of really significant rules for pirates in her employ, which was, you will treat women with respect. If you engage with sex workers, you will pay them properly. You will treat them properly. If you marry a woman, you will be with that woman. You will not mistreat her or misrespect her. And if she found out that you did anything that violated any of her rules, she would have your manhood removed in various ways. And there are lots of different like stories about how the manhood would be removed and what would happen to said manhood. I don't need to
hear them, Jamie.
Are you sure? Because it's really fascinating.
Through magic.
But
be saved for later use.
But the idea was that this was a traditionally masculine space. This was a traditionally patriarchal system that women would have to either bend into or subvert. And it was very difficult either way. I think a lot of the ideas we have that soldiers or sailors had superstitions about women, that's a holdover from ancient time periods. Yeah. The idea of women being sirens and all of that sort of thing. I think by the time we get to the period that we're talking about, a lot of that lore had sort of fallen off. I think, men by that point got a little bit smarter. They were like, maybe women aren't going to get the wrath of Poseidon against us. But it was still more about societal expectations than it was about any sort of fear of mythological, death.
Well, I want to ask you about this because obviously the sexuality of women comes into play here. And I feel like at this point in time, we really have to put this on its head and talk about the normality of homosexual relationships on board, right? So can we speak towards the idea of homosexual relationships amongst pirates? Is this common? Does this exist? I'm assuming the answer is yes to both, but can either of you speak to male relationships, same-sex relationships during the era?
It's hard.
Do we know them?
Well, it's hard because during that time, the concept of like same-sex romance did not even exist. It was a peculiarity, especially amongst men. In terms of, homosexual relationships on pirate ships, we don't actually know. There was a practice called matelotage, which is where it was sort of like you become like almost legally bound on the ship together. Two pirates would do so. This was usually as a way of security. So that way your goods could either go back to your family or you could have someone to leave your goods to. Maybe it's possible sometimes it could have been to romance. There are cases of, situational homosexuality where you're in such confined close quarters for so long that these deep relationships do develop. We've seen that all throughout history in all areas. In terms of on pirate ships, though, I mean, I don't know. I honestly, what I always say is I'm guessing probably a similar percentage as everyone's average workplace. A lot of people think that, pirate ships, they were a place where you could go to be accepted where nobody else could. It's like, not really, actually, because pirates weren't nearly as altruistic or as progressive as we think. There were black pirates, but they usually had the worst jobs on pirate ships. And sometimes they got sold by the pirates. It begs to be seen as to whether or not people in same-sex relationships would be accepted back then. I have a hard time believing it, but it's a lack of evidence thing. So I'm really curious to see what Jamie has to say on the subject too.
No, I would agree with that. We don't have the direct evidence, and it's one thing for us to read into historical relationships, right? But we have words and terminology today to describe different kinds of relationships that either did not exist then or would just not have been used in the traditional lexicon at the time. And so, yes, I think matelotage primarily was an economic sort of arrangement. It was done out of necessity. It was done as a means of security so that you knew if something happened to you, you knew where your share went.
Exactly.
Because again, a lot of these individuals did have families and their crewmates knew that. And so we do have some evidence of where something would happen to somebody and their share was then delivered to their family by their matelotage partner. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that it never happened or it wasn't a possibility because I just don't think it's any more prevalent on a pirate ship than it would have been on a traditional merchant ship or a Royal Naval vessel or any other sort of situation. And it definitely, I think it still would have been hidden. It still would have been a more underground sort of relationship because, again, as Rebecca points out, we have this idea of pirates as these egalitarian, proto-democratic, I don't know, like socialists almost who had just had this like very progressive view of society. And that is not at all the case. The vast majority of pirates had absolutely no problem participating in and actively advancing the enslavement of African and indigenous peoples. They had a very, strict concept of hierarchy still.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think homosexuality or anything along those lines would have still been viewed with a lens of skepticism, with trepidation. And so I think that for a lot of these individuals, they still would have hidden it. It doesn't mean there was no homosexuality at all. Absolutely not. I think that it absolutely existed. It's just to what degree and how would we prove it?
Yeah. Leave it to two pirate historians to come in here and just obliterate anything that you think about pirates.
Rum, sodomy, and the lash be damned.
Oh, yeah. Oh, don't even go there.
I want to ask you, this movie has a subtitle, Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yes.
And I want to ask you about the idea of superstition. Were pirates of this era particularly superstitious, religious people? Like, what's the role of superstition in the lives of these pirates at this time? So much of this is based upon this idea of these cursed coins, and so forth. So I'm wondering, do pirates buy into this? How much of this is mythology versus how much of this is fact? Like, how superstitious are these guys?
But I think Jamie kind of nailed it earlier when she said that at this point, men have become smarter in terms of the superstitions. I think, at this point, like, there's always superstitions. All groups are superstitious. You look at athletes, they've got their superstitions, about how to win a game. Pirates did, there were stories, there was mythology, stories that pirates like to tell on ships, really popular ones about, different things like mermaids and sirens. A lot of these stories kind of came about to prevent you from drowning. That was always a big fear of sailors. You don't want to drown. You don't want to do anything that could sabotage yourself.
Could these sailors swim, Rebecca?
Some could, some couldn't. Just like anybody else. And in terms of like these stories, a lot of times these superstitions, they were actually told really to pass the time. And in terms of like pirates in this case, weren't any different than anybody else. Like, not all sailors were pirates, but all pirates were sailors. So they all kind of come from like these very similar backgrounds and beliefs. So, they have these superstitions, yes, but more for storytelling, really, than actually like living your life. There were probably some who were very superstitious and very much did believe in this, just like for any subject, anything. So it's very possible that there were some pirates who did believe in hardcore and a lot of the mythology, but for the most part, yeah, like I said, they were stories to tell, fun campfire stories on a ship.
I mean, even today you have sailors, we have all the modern technological instruments, et cetera, but there's still the, red sky at dawn versus red sky at night, those sorts of things. Like, even though they know that that's not how that works, it's still something that they say. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think by this point, a lot of the sailors, they have a lot of those like superstitions or stories. I think where it really comes into play is not so much superstitions as it is something I talked about at the beginning, was their fear for their immortal souls. Because even though they may have not been supremely superstitious, maybe they aren't even supremely religious individuals. Even the most unreligious individual at this time, especially, did have a fear of what if, like, oh shit, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I don't make amends before I'm hanged or before I die or this, that, and the other, which is what Mather and his colleagues are kind of preying on. They're like trying to take advantage of. And so I think a lot of it just comes down to more about their concerns for themselves in the afterlife, as opposed to like the what ifs of the living situation.
I want to ask you, like, when we think about this movie, all three of us are like gung ho. We're like, absolutely, let's talk about this movie. We all love this film for different reasons. And it's well established by now, I'm a Disney diehard at this point in time. I literally, I forgot while we're doing this. So, in fact, one of the things that I did over the weekend was I spent my good hard-earned money on this bitchin' ass Disney pirate Halloween Look who's the captain.
Oh my God, I love it.
Where did you get that?
Not Mickey.
Cool. That is
Costco.
awesome.
Isn't
Where
this
she
freaking
has to
awesome?
go.
It's on sale for $70 right now.
Oh my God, amazing.
Look, it makes songs. Look at this thing.
That
I need
is
to go to
amazing.
Costco.
I'm like, isn't this so cool? All right, so I'll have to put this down before I break it. But so we all love this movie. So my question is, what are your favorite parts of this film? What is this movie doing so well that speaks to you on a level that really endears you to this film? This is not the only pirate movie out there.
Mm-hmm.
What is this movie doing that sucks you in ways that other films do not?
I think for me, so the one I know the most is, of course, the first one. I've only seen the other ones in the franchise once, but I've seen the first one, like, can't even tell you how many times.
Exact same.
I think it's just that the story is, all the characters are really compelling. The story is really well paced. The dialogue is just snappy and witty and spot on. Like, for me, the film never lags. There's never like a lull. There isn't really a part of the film where I'm like, oh, I can take a bathroom break real quick. Like, I stay like just right in my seat. It's just a really great crafted story. And also for me, that's always really important whenever I watch a movie, is the soundtrack is next level awesome. Like, it is phenomenal. And that's one of the things that always keeps me in a movie. Like, a lot of times I'll say like a movie is only as good as its soundtrack. So
the score is outstanding.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to be seeing Hans Zimmer perform in October. I'm so excited. Even though he didn't score the first one, a lot of people think he did. He didn't. He just ran with it, which drives me nuts. But that's also another reason why I just get so into it. The music is it just defines the movie so perfectly. And yeah, it's just like, I don't know. For me, it's just like for me, it's one of those films. It's like a perfect film. Like, I can't think of a single thing wrong with it.
I think I love the fact that they're able to go with all the stereotypes, right? They're able to go with all the like the traditional things that we pull from, Treasure Island, et cetera, all the things that make what we envision a pirate to be, even though we know in reality that's not at all what it was. But they're able to do that in a way that's not overly cheesy. They do it in a way that can still get your attention, and they still are able to tell a compelling story in a way that, so I know from, I want to say, what is it, from the 1950s to until that film, there's the pirate curse, right? Like, every movie about pirates from after the 1950s to that point, like, just bombs miserably. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it is because they're able to take those like traditional, campy, stereotypical elements, but they're able to do it in such a way that is engaging and is fun. And they don't play dumb to the audience.
Yes.
And I think and I think that was what's wrong with a lot of those earlier films. The reason why a lot of those earlier films fell flat is because they sort of treated their audience as if they were incapable of understanding the nuance of piracy.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem in movies today now, in general. And that's one of the I used to love going to movies, and I find I haven't really enjoyed it nearly as much, not even because of the pandemic, but I feel like it's become such a trend yet again, where movies are acting like the audience, it dumbs it down for the audience. Like, we're not going to get it. Like, I think that's absolutely spot on, that like they take all of these tropes, but they redo it in a way. There's no cliches. None of it is, they're not talking down to us at all. They know that we're going to get it as we watch it, and we're going to enjoy it.
No, there's a trust of the audience that frankly is not found in, say, the new Star Trek films or the new Star Wars sequels. It's just not, there's a pandering in those films where it's just like, let's play down to you and let's explain everything on the base level, and never a moment where it's like, we expect you to get it. And this film expects you to like roll with it. The whole Barbossa Sparrow storyline, which we never see, just alluded to again. It's like, we trust for you to understand there's a relationship here. We don't need to spell it out for you. You'll figure it out. Right.
Yeah.
They also did the impossible. I worked at Walt Disney World. I did the college program in 1998.
Oh, cool.
Greatest experience of my life. That's the reason I'm such a Disney diehard. You can't see this. People hear it all the time. I have a full-size poster of the Enchanted Tiki Room to my left, Carousel Progress directly behind me, and then the blueprints to Splash Mountain over on the far wall.
So cool.
Yeah, I love Disney with my whole heart. And I remember when they were doing this, people were like, this is impossible. You can't make a movie on a ride. And their integration of the little things, the dog with the key from the original,
iconic
from the ride,
mm-hmm.
just the little throwbacks to let you know, okay, we're respecting the source material. We're going to tell a story, but the city kind of feels like the ride, the original ride.
Yeah.
Of course, now they've gone back to retcon the ride to where Jack Sparrow's in the ride itself, which is fine to me. That I expected. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
And it's fine. And they've gone back and changed a couple things. The woman is no longer for sale on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, which is probably a good choice. But there are the little touches here. There are the moments like we talked about, the scene with Barbossa, but like the little things I can still remember the way they sold this thing. There's that great scene where Elizabeth Swann is hiding in the closet.
Oh yeah.
And all you see is the eye.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that hello, Poppet. And it's like they just nail it.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. It's the movie never takes itself too seriously at the same time. It just tells such a fun, riveting story, playing with the mythology and throwing in maybe some of the history. It's the perfect cauldron.
Yeah. I wish I had brought my Disney ears up. I had never been to Disney before until a couple years ago. Kyle took me to Disney World, and so my rule was I was going to get one set of ears per park.
Cool.
Sure.
Many years later. But one of the ones, because I remember I got Moana ears at the main park, and he was like, but we can't leave until you have pirate ears also. Like, come on. So I have the pirate ears. But yeah, I wish I brought those up.
I did get last time I was at Disneyland, or like a year or two ago, because I go for my birthday like every year. So I'm a Disney millennial. We got off Pirates Caribbean, and I was told to buy one.
Love it. I love it.
Nice. I'm wearing a tricorn hat. I never actually know how to put it on properly, but it feels good when I do it this way.
That works.
Got one of these hats, pirate hat, and my friends, my husband were like, gotta buy it. And so, yeah, I keep it on top of my bookshelf.
Do you have a favorite quote from this film?
I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. Means no.
I love that.
That would probably be my favorite. Yeah. But the other one is, well, the code is more like guidelines.
That's another phenomenal one.
I'm gonna say one word. Parlay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so much fun. The riffing between Swan and Barbossa.
Yes.
They're going back and forth. The chess match where the two of them are just like playing on the code. And also, I'm a pirate. I'm going to do what I want. It's God.
It's brilliant.
I love this. I love this. I want to talk to you about your favorite books on piracy that you haven't written.
Okay.
Rebecca, Jamie, do you have 3 books? We've already talked about Marcus, who is, by the way, fellow Kentuckian. But your 3 favorite books on the history of piracy. What do you got for our listeners here? Jamie's like, I don't think I can do 3. I can see the face.
It's hard. It's like how to narrow it down. I'm like looking at my shelf right now.
I know. That's what I'm doing. I'm looking. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm limiting myself. I'm not going to say Rebecca's books because I really want to say Rebecca's books. But if I'm not going to say Rebecca's books, then I'm going to go.
You guys are going to get cited in the show notes anyway. So
I'm
non-Jamie, non-Rebecca books.
Yes. I will say Eric J. Dolan's Rebels at Sea. I really enjoyed that. Mark Hanna's Pirate Nests. And then Richie's book on Captain Kidd.
Oh, yeah. I can't go wrong with that one. Yeah, my list is pretty similar. My favorite is also, again, like Jamie, I'm not going to name Jamie's books, even though her books are amazing. The ones I really enjoy, I love Mark Hanna's book, Pirate Nest. I think it's one of the best books written on pirates.
It's sitting right over there.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's just so good. I really enjoy, so a really, really good one that just came out is Enemies of All by Richard Blakemore.
Yes.
Yeah, that one was really good. And also just shout out to him. He's also such a nice guy. So everyone should read his book just because of that. But it's legit.
We'll get him on for Black Sails.
It's yes. Perfect choice. But it is a really phenomenal book. And then also The one other book I was going to say, also, honestly, the Captain Kidd by Robert C. Ritchie. That one is just, it covers everything, not just Captain Kidd, but laws against pirates and the development of pirates, the Royal Navy and the East India Company. If anyone wants to be like, what is the ultimate intro to pirates, read Captain Kidd and the War Against the Pirates by Robert Ritchie, because it really gives you a good primer to get you ready for books like Pirate Nest, Villains of All Nations, and that sort of thing.
Do you have a favorite non-Pirates of the Caribbean pirate movie?
Muppet Treasure Island. I mean, is there any other? Or can I also say The Princess Bride?
Absolutely. He's a pirate.
The whole idea of like, it's not about the pirate, it's about the brand. Like we were talking about.
Can I tell you, Rebecca, can I tell you a thing on that? Back when I used to be on the dating apps. And they would always say, tell us the thing about you, right? I would always say, I'm the real Dread Pirate Roberts.
Oh, that's amazing.
That line slayed, right? Like
so
to a certain audience, that was like best thing I ever said.
Yeah, that's how you know you're going to meet the right person, is with something like that. My husband, we met on a dating app, and the first question he asked me was, or first thing he said was, rate all 7 seasons of Buffy, favorite to least favorite. And I was like, oh, we can go on for a long time now.
See, can I tell you, I actually like Angel with Cordelia more than I like Angel with Buffy. And I think Spike's a better match.
Oh, absolutely. 1,000%. 1,000% agree.
The whole thing with Angel and Cordelia, when she's like, were we in love? And then like they just, oh.
So good.
Angel was a better show than Buffy. I'm sorry.
See, I haven't seen enough of Angel, but I'm a Spike girl all the way, I gotta say.
All right. Spike was awesome.
Anyways.
Jamie.
All right. So it's called The Pirates, but it's a Korean film, 2014.
Huh.
Really amazing. So when I was still teaching at Stevenson, one of the things we did was we watched a bunch of different pirate films from different nations. And so this is a Korean film called The Pirates. Very, very good. Highly recommend. But aside from that, I want to say it's Norwegian. It's Norwegian. Also from 2014. How about 2014 for the win?
Yeah. And that's when Black Sails came out, was 2014.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Captain Sabretooth and the Treasure of Lama Rama.
Yeah, that actually sounds familiar.
If you've not watched Captain Sabretooth and the Treasure of Lama Rama.
Oh my God. I mean,
obviously that's in Norwegian, but yeah, so but yeah, so those are, I'm gonna give those to you because they're non-English films. Those will be mine too.
That's awesome.
I've got one.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that we can get Christy Flannery on for this one. It's a film from 1983 with Tommy Lee Jones, Nate and Hayes.
Oh.
Do you know this movie?
I've heard of it. I've never seen it though.
It's the post-Indiana Jones films when all of a sudden everybody is like trying to create their own version of Indiana Jones. Yeah. Nate Hayes comes out. King Solomon's Mine comes out. You've got a 40-year-old. I mean, Tommy Lee Jones was born like at 104 years old, right? He's always been that craggly bastard, right? So even then, he's like 30. So there's like a 37-year-old Tommy Lee Jones, which is like impossible to imagine.
Love it.
Right? But there's that. So that's my option here. My final question to the two of you.
Okay.
Is Pirates of the Caribbean a history movie?
It's as history as you want it to be.
Love. I'm going to go. You know what? I'm going to stick with Jamie's answer there. That is perfect.
This movie is so much fun. Talking about pirates is fun. It's the subject matter, maybe more than almost anything else, is so dangerous at times because it's so subject to romanticization because of what pop culture has done to it. Nobody talks about a lot of some of the stuff that we talk about here in the terms that we talk about with pirates, but this movie is so perfect and so fun.
Amazing.
And I am so glad the two of you guys came on to talk about this movie. I was gung-ho. I was ready to do it. So Rebecca, Jamie, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Stay tuned for Black Sails Rewatch.
Yes. Oh my God. We have to do it.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so much to our guests, Jamie Goodall and Rebecca Simon. Thank you so much for being here, for steering the show. I'm sorry, guys, I can't help but do the puns, but I promise you that Fletcher Powell is quartermaster of HATM. I did it again. I don't care. Hey, guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for continuing to support HATM. Thank you for being here, for sharing this with your friends. If you like HATM, you want to share this on social media, please do so. If you want to support HATM, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians of the movies or by shooting us an email at hatmpodcast@gmail.com, and we can set you up with some sponsorship there. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This is a blast. We have so many more great podcasts coming to you this fall. I'm so excited for you to hear them all. So, that said, ciao for now.